All right, we're continuing here in chapter 17, beginning in slide number 29. We're going to talk about the economic dimension of national security policy. Obviously, the military, the use of the military is what we typically think of when we're talking about foreign policy, but the United States, and every country does this, they utilize their economic might to supplement the military power. Again, the idea is you don't want to use your military if you don't have to, particularly in a free country with Republican, small r, government. And so one of the ways that you get around that, or at least get away from having to use your military all the time, is leveraging, your economic strength. There are three major economic centers in the world. The U.S. produces about 1/5 of the world's goods and services. The European Union about 1/4, and the Pacific Rim area, again, think China, 1/5. The United States is the weakest because we have the largest trade deficit. We haven't had a surplus since 1975. Okay, does that affect us? Yes, it does. But the flip side is the U.S. probably has the strongest economy out of all three of them because of our technical innovation, because of a lot of our banking systems, our educational systems, and the way we diversify things together, and then, of course, our agriculture. And so we try to use that to our advantage. If you go to slide number 30, you can see the economic dimension of national security goals, okay, or national security policy, rather. Number one, we try to sustain a stable and open system of trade that promotes prosperity at home. So obviously, if you want to have a strong military, and you want to have a strong defense, and you want to make sure that you have you're resourcing your military in every aspect of it. Well, one of the ways you continually keep resourcing your military is you have a strong economy. Okay, if you continually have a weak economy or a breaking down economy, sooner or later you're going to have to basically decrease funding to your military. Okay, so that is very, very important. Second of all, you need to make sure you've got access to oil and other natural resources vital to the strength of the U.S. economy. Again, in the last 10 years, the means of fracking has helped our economy in the area of oil production to where we're not as reliant on foreign oil as we used to be. Is that a good thing? Yes, that's a good thing. Okay, so now we're not as beholden in Middle Eastern intrigue and the price setting of OPEC, okay, these oil producing countries over there. So that's very important. The third area is that, we try to prevent the widening gap between rich and poor countries from disrupting the world economy. Okay, so, and of course this could be very controversial. Should the have nations continually give to the have-not nations when the have-not nations are not trying themselves to better their economy, but they're continually going to the have nations and asking for aid? That's a very controversial thing, and we talk about this at length in my international relations class. But why would we care? Why would we care what's going on in poor countries? So what? We're America. That's no concern of ours. Well, one of the ways that affects our foreign policy is that if poorer countries are seeing themselves continually left in the dust behind developing countries, that could lead to war. Okay, that could lead to them fighting against it or going. In other words, if your economy's falling apart and you got nothing to lose and you're led by a warlord, hey, why not? Okay, in other words, when you have these kind of breakdowns going on in these countries, you find that they're a lot more belligerent, or so goes the logic. Okay, so the thinking is, if you can help them, not just giving them a handout, but if you can actually help their infrastructure and help them develop themselves and help them to learn how to develop their own really good banking systems and really good entrepreneurial, innovations and things of that nature, you're going to create a better environment, so to speak, for the world on a global setting. So that's why we get involved in nations like that. And then the final thing is just we try to contribute to the stability of the global economy, because again, if the economy is stronger, you're going to have less likelihood of problems or warfare. One of the things, again, as I record this, and maybe future classes will watch this, I don't want to date this, but I'm recording this on March 30th, 2020. One of the concerns they're having with this coronavirus outbreak is because so much of the concern is trying to deal with this virus and all that kind of stuff. Are we more vulnerable to a terrorist attack? if our economy is being hit, and again, it's not just our economy, it's economies of nations all throughout the developed world are being hit with this virus, does that, cause these nations and their systems to become more vulnerable to some form of a terrorist attack? So in other words, it's a good thing for the United States to try to continually help cause the economy to be strong and stable as best as they can. If you go to the next slide, most U.S. firms are multinational corporations or transnational corporations. Okay, so meaning, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nike, Apple, McDonald's, pick your favorite global country or company rather. We've got operations in other countries. Does that cause us to be interested in international relations? Yes, because obviously as that country goes, so does our firms in that particular country. And so we got to be very, very careful about that. The challenges are when these companies engage in trade practices that are in contradiction to some of our foreign policy goals, okay? In other words, in Africa, U.S. oil companies have supported dictatorships to maintain access to oil fields. Okay, is that a problem? Yeah, if you get, in other words, you're having to make nice with some dictator who is engaged in all kinds of human rights violations so we can have oil flowing to our country. Is that a good thing? Does that create problems? This is exactly what happened with the United States in the 60s and the 70s with the Shah of Iran. Okay, the Shah of Iran was not what you consider a stand-up guy. He was better than most, but again, he was not a good guy. But this idea that, hey, we got a lot of oil from Iran, so we propped up this guy. And the CIA and the military tried to help keep this thing, keep the Shah of Iran in leadership. And then, of course, when all of that collapsed in 1971, when the mullahs and the Islamic radicals took over Iran, that exposed, some of the challenges with all of that, because we were indirectly ticking off the more radical factions of the Iranians by supporting the Shah of Iran, and so that can become an issue. And again, I don't want to belabor some of these other points, but if you look at slide number 32, again, talking about the side of economic globalization, because we're so interconnected with all of these other countries because of global trade, that affects us, and we try to maintain free trade as much as possible. Okay, we try to not shut ourselves off from the international trading system. Again, I submit to you that probably most of you, if you went into your closets and looked at your shirts and looked at your pants and all those kind of things, I would dare say that a good portion, a good percentage of what you buy is from a foreign country, whether directly or indirectly. And the reason you enjoy lower prices, so you can buy at a pretty reasonable price, is because of free trade. Okay, if America began to shut itself off and only produce its own shirts and only produce its own jeans and only produce its own this and that, in other words, could we still get a lot of this stuff? Yes, but it would probably be much more expensive. And so that's the idea, that's the logic of free trade. Okay, the downside, it might cause American businesses to offshore and move a factory offshore and thus losing hundreds of thousands of jobs. The upside, for the vast majority of Americans, we can buy cheaper products. Okay, that's the logic of free trade. I'm going to skip over to let's see, probably 35, and I'll just close with this one. But talking about slide number 35, assisting developing nations. And again, I've kind of already talked about that, but America gives about 1% or less of its annual income, okay, to foreign countries. So there's always controversy about foreign trade or foreign aid and things like that, but we do not give large amounts to other countries. We try to work through what's called the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that was created after World War II at the Bretton Woods Conference. And we try to work with giving loans to countries that are in need so that their economies don't collapse. Again, why do we want to do that? Okay, why does America contribute? I think we contribute anywhere between 16 to 17% of all of the funds that come into the IMF and the World Bank. So we have the dominant share of contributions. We also have the dominant share of voting power. But we try to do that because, again, because we've got a global economy, because everything's so connected and interconnected, if one nation goes down, especially if it's a developed nation, okay, it can start pulling other nations down as well. So they try to set up a system where, okay, if you're given aid, you're given $100 billion of aid because of your country's economy is collapsing. We basically impose upon something called the Washington Consensus, which is basically American-style free market capitalism. We say, listen, we'll give you this $100 billion, but the government's got to keep its hands off the economy. We want a deregulated economy. We want freedom of the press. We want rights within your country. In other words, we try to challenge nations. Listen, if you're going to get this money, you also need to embrace kind of the U.S. way of doing things, because we believe it'll help you flourish long term. And so again, the reason why we do that is to try to keep other countries from going down, which pulls us all down again. And then if you look at slide 36, I didn't say I was going to do this, but I will. The 2008 economy, when it went down because of the banking crisis in the United States, again, this all interconnectedness pulls other countries down. Why is that significant in 2020 as I record this? Because we don't know exactly what this COVID-19 crisis is going to do globally. If it was a problem in 2008, I personally believe it's going to be far worse for our world, given how this is impacting all of these nations and these nations trying to bounce back from this. And so that's where it'll be very interesting to see how the United States works within the UN, within the IMF, within the World Bank, to try to help nations that are kind of trying to get back from this crisis. If the U.S. economy goes down, I mean, if literally, we're like 25, 30% down in the market, if that stays that way and unemployment continues, we're not going to have the means to help other countries. So it's really important for the United States to get out of this thing. So it'll be very, very interesting just to see what goes on. So hopefully this helps you a little bit with chapter 17. And if you got any questions, obviously send me an email and I'll try to help you as best I can. All right, take care.